Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Come As You Are. And today is a very special episode. I'm not going to give you a lot of context because honestly, I'm not the voice that needs to be heard in this situation. But I'm very pleased to be welcoming my friend, Asif Masood, to the stage so that we can talk about, well, a lot of things. So, Asif, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you set the stage for our conversation today.
Sure. Thank you, Alyssa. It's like where do we start, right?
I know.
Um,
There's so many things. Do you want to start with who you are? And I think maybe then we can kind of take it into a couple different places.
no, that's a perfect way to start. Hear this a little bit better. Yeah. My name is Asif Masood, as Alyssa mentioned. I am historically an IT person. That's how I've identified from a career perspective. I started off as a programmer trainee back in the early '90s and worked my way up. But of course, I am many more things than and what my profession is, right? So I'm a child of immigrants. My dad came here from Hyderabad, India, in the late 1950s, so in 1959 to be exact. He came here for school. Went back, got married to my mom in '68. He went back in '67. They got married in '68. Came here, and then I was born in Chicago in 1969. So that is another part of my identity. I am a dad, although my daughter is 27 years old and married, and is expecting. So I'll be a grandfather. So another part of my
Congratulations.
identity, right? In December. Um, I have done a lot of work improving myself from an emotional intelligence, intelligence perspective. So I've been doing that work for about 10 years and got my master's degree in transformational leadership and coaching. Um, and then from there, so I do a lot of work still in that arena. Have done various things as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion go in the past few years. And then I think more specifically, I am the Interfaith and Outreach Chair at the Muslim Community Center here in Chicago, and I'm also on the board of Muslim Writers Collective here in Chicago, and that's a good, I think, few pillars of where I'm at. I'm sure I'm missing something, but that's a great place to start.
It is. And we have time. We can get to all the other things, but I think it's beautiful that you laid the stage for your identity because that plays a large role in our conversation today. I mean, I think the other piece of this that probably plays a large role is historical context. So I think where we can start is to talk about what's currently happening, and then we can talk about the history. How does that sound?
Sure. That sounds great. Not great and not, not
Yeah,
great, but
great, not so great. Yeah.
not so great. Yeah. Yeah. I think, and obviously you're talking about the Palestinian Israeli conflict. And from an Arabic standpoint, even Palestine is actually Philistine, is kind of how we refer to it. Uh, just from a just proper pronunciation standpoint. Most people think, or most the narrative I think that we're being told is that this conflict started on October 7th of this year, just about 3 weeks ago tomorrow. And of course, anyone who knows the history knows that this conflict goes back a lot further than that. We can go back even to 2007, where the current set of boundaries, I think, were drafted. We can probably even go back to the '70s and '60s, where the last wars have happened, or even earlier into the '40s, when the current state of Israel was formed, or late '90s, or when I say '90s, so this is 1890s, not
Right.
1990s, of when the actual Zionist movement started. So, there's probably many layers to go to that, but I think let's just start with 2007. So if you look at Gaza and Israel and kind of where they're situated, to set proper context, Hamas as an organization has existed in various forms, probably in the last 25 years or so. But what happened in the mid 2000s was that they won the election in the Gaza Strip. So there were elections that were held. The PLO won in the West Bank and Hamas won in Gaza. And of course, Israel didn't like that necessarily, and the US didn't like that at all. So they did not recognize that government. And subsequently a blockade was set up in Gaza, not allowing food, water, any other supplies. And once in a while, Israel will let some things in, and they control everything, right, from electricity to everything. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting to see how that control, even paying of the PLO, right, is controlled through the Israeli government, which is really uh, weird in that sense that you're rivals and you control their salary. So how does that play into everything as well, right? Um, but in the last 10 years, um, so you have these checkpoints, you have this apartheid state set up in such a way that different people of the country are treated in different ways. Like Israelis are allowed to travel freely. Palestinians have to go through checkpoints and screenings and all that. And even to the point where if you're trying to get to a hospital from Gaza into is Jerusalem, wherever where there's better care, you have to go through these checkpoints, and sometimes people needing critical care have been denied access to come through, and they've died on the Gaza side of things,
Mhm.
right? So when you go through the unfairness of things like that, of land taken from you, treated just badly. And you think about it, even from a human standpoint, these guards, like, let's just flip it a little bit. These guards are 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids from the Israeli side who have been given power over others. And you think about teenagers having this power to do whatever you want. Some of them have consciences, sure, but others, they're going to behave like kids, right? And so, in that sense, they take that power a little bit too far, and they're pretty much can do whatever they want, right? Who's holding them necessarily accountable? And so that's and we can get to that point as well, like accountability and how that has led to where we're at. But I just want to finish this one point. When you're repeatedly treated badly daily and people have died, um, and you have no recourse, where do you turn to air your grievances?
Mhm.
At some point, days, months, years, you will snap, right? And again, I don't condone what Hamas did. I don't condone the killing of innocents. I can't say that enough because people don't hear that part when I say next. You know, they,
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't want to say they snap, but this is how they retaliated, and this is what happened on October 7th to set the stage. And we can talk about what helped, what has been going on since then.
Yeah.
But that contextual history is not shared, definitely not in the news here, as to kind of what led to where, what started this whole thing this round.
Yeah. Thank you so much for going through that. To your point, this goes back decades, centuries. There are so many layers and nuances to this that definitely do not begin on October 7th. And so laying that groundwork and talking about it is incredibly important. And I love the context that you provided about the age of the guards. I've read about some of these checkpoints, and some of them are very notorious. The amount of time that somebody spends in there can be hours, and that's part of their day. So that's a very important context. I think the other important context as we're talking about age is the average age of an inhabitant of Gaza right now. I know that's something that is important to bring up too. So we have a lot of innocents that are losing their lives, and we have a lot of young people on
Yeah.
both sides of this that are experiencing it. So where do you want to take us next? Because you sent me a wonderful article that I'm really grateful you did. And it talks about how part of this justice work is to understand this history. And
Right.
so having these conversations, and to your point about making sure that we say the killing of innocents is not okay, regardless of the situation, where do we go from here? Where do you want to take the conversation?
I think the next part in this, is the shelling that had started, pretty soon after. I think part of this is we were caught off guard. The U.S. intelligence agencies, Israeli intelligence agencies, I think it's just they got caught off guard. They're angry, and there's many other things that go into it, and so this is their way of lashing out and punishing. And this is collective punishment, right? So we talk about again, war crimes and international law. You find the people that did this, and okay, so if that's what you want to do, okay, so what does that even mean? All right, would you take them to court, or would you execute them on the spot, right? So that we can even discuss that. But regardless of that, you're bombing civilian site of 2.2 million people. It's an open air prison, and there is no way to escape. They're not going to allow anybody, whatever, coming in through the Israeli side. The other side is the Egyptian side, which is also closed, and it's been bombed during these bombings, right? That place has been bombed to actually stop convoys from coming in. Um, so okay, so one part of, okay, it's retaliation, or we're angry for doing this, but also, I mean, the narrative is this is Hamas's land. That everybody that lives in this land, if you didn't ally yourself with Hamas, or if you didn't agree with their policies, then you're somehow susceptible. I mean, 2.2 million people, right? That you're all susceptible of what they did, and you all need to be punished, right? Which is, again, against international law. The other part of this is they're calling this a war, right? So a war happens in two equal factions that have armies and weapons and things like that. This is a civilian population that we're attacking. It's not a war. I would say we're moving towards a genocide, right? Like this is slowly moving towards. I think with the ground war that'll happen. I mean, right now I think 5,000 people have died in the Gaza Strip, and this is daily. They're saying about 150, 200 people are dying, and half of those are babies, right? Because that is of the 2.2 million, half of those are kids that are in this area. And the other part of it is, I mean, it's indiscriminate bombing. It's also, you're saying you're warning people to move from the north to the south and then bombing those convoys that are going. They've even bombed southern Gaza, which is supposed to be like, all right, you told the folks to go there, then why are you bombing them? So just the mixed signals of that. And if you look at social media, I think the other part of that is you ask folks to have a ceasefire or to stop bombing, and the response is generally like, go talk to Hamas. Like somehow that's, or Hamas started this, so that makes it okay for us to bomb, which yeah, to me, that narrative, and I guess we want to get to the humanity of this, right? Because we've lost our humanity throughout all of this piece of it, when you can easily say, where you're looking for blame, to put blame on people rather than looking at who's dying right now. And there's, higher agendas in play, obviously, but just the fact that we're okay killing people like that doesn't make it doesn't sit well with me, and in a lot of ways, it doesn't make sense to me and the folks that are somehow trying to justify that.
Yeah.
That's painful.
It is. It's incredibly painful. And I think, when we first stopped on the call, we took some breaths to ground ourselves, because the weight of this, as we see the news reports every single day, it impacts you regardless of your identity. But obviously, when you're holding an identity that is connected to this, that weight is a lot heavier, a lot stronger. And it brings it to light so much more. And I think back, as a millennial that remembers 9/11 and what happened after that. I think about the bias and the bigotry that infiltrated the workplace, our schools, and how that has probably continued, not even probably, how that has continued to today. And again, highlighting the fact that this did not begin October 7th. And I think I love, again, how you bring us back to humanity, because that's really what this is about. If we take a look at who's dying, who's suffering, it's children, it's babies. And even beyond that, if it's not children and babies, it's people. And we have a higher calling as a world, as a people, as individuals to make sure that we're doing our best so that something like this doesn't continue to happen. Um,
Yeah.
I know that something happened recently, a deep tragedy here in the Chicago suburbs. To your comfort level, I'd love for you to share because you pulled something beautiful together to bring people together in this moment. But I don't want to step away from the pain that is very real and being felt throughout our communities. So I'll give you the stage to talk about what's happening locally and what you're doing about it.
Sure. No, thank you. Before I jump into that, I do want to mention, because you brought up 9/11, and we've done a lot of work that's 22 years ago now. We've all done a lot of work to learn from what happened, or we hope we learn from what happened, right? Because part of this also is, what did we do? What did the US do after 9/11? I mean, there are around two, and the numbers, because a lot
They
of these
fluctuate
are,
for sure.
yeah, there's about like 2 million people, innocent civilians, died in Afghanistan and Iraq as a result of us going in, right? I'm not talking about the enemy combatants, whatever. Like, these are innocent civilians that, due to bombing different things, that died. And we're on the verge of something similar to that. I think part of the pain also is, and whether this is the DI work or, since the death of George Floyd, we jumped in and did a lot of introspection around race and systemic violence, just the systems in place. And it seems like a lot, I don't want to say all, but a lot of our allies that were with us through, the last, for about 20 years, but let's just say 3 to 5 years, it seems like that has gone on deaf ears on this, on this on this incident or this story. And that's painful to kind of be in, because it felt like we made a lot of progress. And we've stepped back a few years now, in that. So that's something to dig in as well.
Thank
But I'll
you.
come
Thank you for
back
pulling us
to,
back to that.
yeah, I'll come back to what you said about locally. And this has to do with the media narrative, right? Whether that's liberal or conservative, the general bias is that, um, we stand with Israel. We cannot criticize Israel, or we're anti-Semitic, but also that the Palestinians are all animals and they needed to be treated in such a way. And this landlord, he was just a normal guy, and he built a treehouse for what they, and he gave them gifts and things like that. And you know something happened to him where, well, his last word, the words that because he burst into his land, the folks that he was renting his apartment to, right? So it was a mom and a son, started to choke her. And I'm probably gonna get the order wrong, but choked her. She ran to the bathroom, and then when she came out, he had stabbed her son multiple times, and at somewhere in there he said something like, "All you Muslims must die." And so to go from one guy who loved this kid and played with him to kill him in a very gruesome manner, is very painful, and that hit home. I mean, it's in Plainfield, an hour from here. And so last week, going to the funeral of this boy just tore us up. Like any parent, you would think would feel for what hit home. And and it's really interesting because a lot of folks would grieve and give your condolences on this boy that was killed, and boys like him are dying in Gaza daily. And somehow we've separated those two things. Like, it's okay to feel sorry for this boy here, but not this boy. Or it's okay to talk about, the babies that were murdered in Israel, but not the babies in Palestine. Like, somehow, and this is just, whether it's race or whatever, like, somehow some people are more important than others. Some deaths are more important than others, right? So I'll stop here for a second in case you have some follow
Yeah,
up. jump
Oh, thank
into.
you. And thank you for going there. I really appreciate this. And you're right. I think what's important to call out here is the dehumanization that we're seeing. When you can refer to another human being as an animal, you're taking away their
Yeah.
humanity. And you've been really intent on focusing this on our mutual and our shared humanity. And I want to make sure that that stays at the forefront because you're right. It doesn't matter if we're 6 or 60 or brown, black, white, our lives matter in this context, and it is a racial component, right? This very much is when we can sit and decide who is worth more than somebody else, that's a white supremacist viewpoint. And we, as a society, you're right, have done a lot of work in this area. And I think the moment that we're in right now shows us the work that we have yet to do and the inner work that we all have to do to have these conversations and to understand again our shared humanity. Again, really grateful that you went there because this is incredibly painful. To your point, you lose a child, it doesn't matter who you are, that is a gutting loss that you never recover from, and to lose a child in this manner is a different story altogether. And I'm really grateful that you are the person that you are because you put on something beautiful to bring people together in this moment. And I'd love for you to talk about it because I think, again, it goes back to what you've been talking about this whole time, humanity. So I'll turn it back over to you to talk about that.
Sure. No, thank you. And I don't want to take full credit. I had a lot of help putting this together, as well. And sure, we all lead in different ways. And um, one of the so I am, like I said, the outreach and interfaith and outreach coordinator at MCC, and the previous person who had that reached out to me, on that Monday. I don't know exactly. I think I was headed to the funeral, and she was like, "We need to do an interfaith prayer. We need to bring people together for this," and it evolved kind of on what we wanted to do. I mean, initially it was just bringing folks together, and can Muslims and Jews at this moment sit in the same room together, right? And I've had one-on-one conversations, right? With I've reached out to my Jewish friends and asked them how they're doing. Like that's easier to do, and not it wasn't easy, but it's easier to do than having a group of folks, right? Because one-on-one, it's just us, and we can actually share a lot whether we agree or disagree, but at least we can see each other's pain. And that was actually important for me, with some of my Jewish friends and allies, reaching out to them and seeing how they're doing, and vice versa. It was nice to hear from them. One of my Jewish friends actually reached out to me, and he was hurt. He's like, "You didn't reach out to me when this happened," and that led to a dialogue. Like, you're right, I didn't reach out to you. I was caught up in the politics, and I was hurt myself. I didn't see your pain in this, and we each talked about each other's pain. Um, so as so we knew wanted to put something together, and then figuring out who we can invite to this, who would be willing to come to this, because it's a charged thing on both sides, right? So I won't sugarcoat it. The initial person that we had invited, I won't say names. She was actually in is really interesting. She was in the Holy Land when the stuff started.
Wow.
Um, like there was a group of folks there on a trip to learn about Black Jerusalem, right? The African context of the city of Jerusalem, and there were about 20 folks there, and they were ready to come back on October 7th, and um, they're at the airport. They're going into the airport, and they're like, "What are these flashing lights coming towards us?" When they realized they were missiles coming towards them, and they ran into the airport. And it's interesting hearing it. Like, you didn't care who was next to you in that moment. You knew it was a life and death situation, whether you were Muslim or Jew, that you wanted to seek safety in that moment, right? But when they came back from this, um, a Palestinian and a rabbi wrote an op-ed in USA Today, and she's gotten a lot of flack from her side because she called out the bombings of Gaza as something that we should be standing up against, and it goes against the narrative, right? That we unequivocally stand with Israel, and so she's gotten a lot of flack for what's going on there, and so so initially we were gonna invite her, and then okay, we talked to her a little bit, but it was like she is already in so much deep water, and so letting her have her safe space and not create more hot water for her is where we went, and but we ended up with another rabbi who actually stepped up, because this was not easy for her to do either. Like, she's putting herself in the crosshairs, in saying that she wanted to be there with us throughout this journey. So that's one side of it. And then on the Muslim side, it's also a controversial topic, um, in that if you're inviting a rabbi, are they Zionist or anti-Zionist, right? And so that narrative also, that if you're not, can you be a Zionist and still speak up for Palestinians, right? Somehow that gets lost, that you can't be both of those things. And so my sentiment is that, you know, it's up to you whether you believe the state should exist or not. That's your personal belief, and that's what you take from it. But I'm going to work with anyone who is speaking up against the treatment, against what's happening with Palestinians, whether you're Zionist or not. I think that for me is an important dialogue to happen, as long as you support, you're against what's happening. If you're ambivalent to what's happening, then you're part of the problem, or actually even happy what's happening, then you're definitely part of the problem, right? But I think, and because there are a lot of Jews and Israelis who don't agree with how Palestinians are being treated, and so we eventually got the event together on a Thursday night. And the other thing I think that's important that was brought up was that we just don't want Muslims talking about Muslim pain and Jews talking about Jewish pain. That it's important to put grief front and center of this, and that we're each and all of us talking about each other's pain.
Yes.
And so that was very important, and I feel like we were able to accomplish that.
I'm sitting in this moment with you with immense gratitude, because I know that talking about this issue, as you commented, going against the narrative, going against the status quo in any way is not comfortable. It's typically not met with kindness. And I see you in it. And I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you do to bring community together and to elevate the collective grief. Because you're right, in this moment, and we haven't really had a moment to fully grieve what happened over the pandemic, what's been happening with the economy. And so, as we've known and seen and heard before, grief and trauma stacks on top of each other. And so we're not just grieving this moment, we're also grieving so much that's happening in our world. And to your point, it should be the grief that's front and center, not a finger point. There's so much that we can do when we come together instead of fighting about it. And again, thank you for sharing your voice, your story, and how this is affecting you. It's a lot of emotional labor, and I do not take that lightly. We'll put some resources together that we can tag in this episode so that folks can get the help that they need. Please seek mental health if you are in need. And if you need a connection, please reach out to IE. We're happy to facilitate something like that for you. But please educate yourself too. As Asif said, if you're not doing something about it, if you're ambivalent to it, you're part of the problem. And the reason for that is because if you aren't against the narrative, then you're supporting the narrative. It makes it okay to believe the dehumanization of people, that the death of killing innocent people is okay. And so I stand with you. I know IE stands with you too. And again, I just want to reflect the gratitude that I'm sharing with you in this moment for our shared humanity and the fact that we can hold space for this conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to end with, or a call to action for folks as we close?
I think the last part in this is, I mean, where we stand at, I think I mentioned the media. I think it's where the government is right now, right? And this is the challenge right now because we got elections coming up in a year. Which way are we going to go? And I don't know right now. With the way the narrative is being portrayed at all levels of government, and that hasn't changed um, all that much in the last 3 weeks, right? So um, the money that we're sending, the bombs that we're sending, the troops that we're sending, it's all it's painful to see that our tax dollars are going towards that, right? So um, as far as I don't know. I mean, from a call to action, you're right. We speak up about it. We air our grievances as much as we can, because you're also right in the corporate space. This is part of the issue. I think seeking mental health is the biggest piece because that's where we can tend to ourselves, and a lot of it we can only do personally and in our homes, right? Because speaking
Yeah.
up, even in the workplace, people are being gaslit and blackballed and fired, also, right? So the spaces have reduced. But from a call to action standpoint, I think we got to keep speaking out. We got to keep educating, and focusing on the humanity, because ultimately, if we keep going down this path, it's gonna just get ugly and uglier, as a potential genocide is going to be allowed to happen in Gaza with the ground war, right? So that's what's next, and definitely keep taking care of yourself because that's the biggest thing, and keep speaking up and standing up. And yeah, I'm
I
at a
think that's,
loss from a because I would say advocate or get involved in elections, and that's a tough one for me right now because it feels a little hopeless because from a political side of things, it seems very locked and doesn't seem
yeah.
like we can have an impact there. So I'm at a loss. I don't want to say we can't do anything, but I'm unclear on how we get through um,
Yeah.
from that aspect.
And I love the transparency and the authenticity in this moment because typically what we try to do as Americans, I think in our corporate world and with the media, is we try to end with this message of hope and that everything is going to be okay. And I think it is okay to leave something open ended and to say, we don't know. And it's also okay to say, right now doesn't feel very good. And so if you're in that space, like Asif said, like I said, please seek help. We're happy to be a conduit for that. And again, Asif, I want to say thank you for sharing your voice and yourself with us today. And we'll see you next time on Come As You Are.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate it.